This is why you should always trust your instincts. In the 1970s, a young man was studying at a college in Chicago, and after one of his classes, he decided to hitchhike home. A man in a car offered him a ride, and he seemed pretty nice and friendly, so the young man got in the car. But things escalated quickly. The man suddenly took a completely different route, and when the young man told him, "You're going the wrong way," he said, "You're coming with me." The young man froze. This was fight or flight. He stayed calm at first and waited. Then, when the car slowed down in traffic, he quickly opened the passenger door and jumped out of the vehicle. Then he ran as fast as he could and he didn't look back. A few years later, this young man was watching TV when something made his blood run cold. There was a photo of the man who picked him up on the news. He had been arrested for the murder of at least 33 boys and young men. And when the interviewer asked him why his car didn't have a door handle, he said that's how his first victim escaped, and he would never make the same mistake again. That was when the young man realized he had escaped from the famous serial killer John Wayne Gacy. This is why when something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Once a newly married couple was searching for houses they could buy, and they came across a beautiful house with a suspiciously cheap price. They couldn't see anything wrong with the house, so they just thought they got lucky. They moved in quickly. But one day the husband was walking down the hallway when he found a red crayon on the floor. He thought maybe the previous residents had left it behind, so he just threw it out. The next day he found another red crayon lying in the exact same place. This time he asked his wife about it. His wife looked shocked. She confessed that every day since they've moved in, she's been finding red crayons in the hallway too. Then the husband tried to tap on the wall at the end of the hallway and heard a hollow sound. He began peeling off the wallpaper and found a sliding door behind it. It was as if someone had tried everything they could to keep anyone from finding this door. He tried to open it, but the door was nailed shut. Then he took a hammer and pried off the nails one by one. He opened the door to find a small room with words scribbled in red crayon all over the walls. It said, "Mommy, I'm sorry, let me out," over and over. This is why you should never knock on a stranger's door. Once there was a man trying to check into a hotel. The woman at the front desk gave him his key and told him none of the guests are allowed to go into the room across the hall. He agreed, but as he continued to stay in the hotel, he grew more and more curious about the room he wasn't supposed to go in. At one point, he even walked down the hall to that room and tried the door. It was locked. Then he bent down and looked through the keyhole. He saw that it was just the same as his hotel room. But in the corner of the room, there was a woman whose skin was extremely pale, almost a sickly white. Her back was to the wall, so the man didn't see what she looked like. He almost knocked on the door, but then just decided to leave her alone. The next day he walked past the door again and decided to look into the keyhole. This time there was no hotel room and no woman. It was all just red. He thought that this seemed really strange, so he went to the front desk and asked about the room. After insisting on an answer, the woman at the front desk told him, "A long time ago, a man killed his wife in that room, and her ghost is still there. But these ghosts are not what you might imagine. They're completely white all over, except for their eyes, which are red." This is why you should never ask too many questions. Once there was an old lady who was widowed and wheelchair bound, living in a house with 2 floors with her caretaker. One day, the police received a call from this old lady's house. The caretaker had been murdered. One detective was sent to investigate, where he found the caretaker's body on the 1st floor, vocal cords ripped out, lying in a pool of blood. The old lady was ruled out as a suspect because she was immobile, but the detective did note that this crime seemed familiar to how the widowed husband died years ago. He had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs when the old lady was upstairs. After getting evidence from the 1st floor crime scene, the detective asked to look upstairs as well. The old lady refused at first, but he insisted and went up anyways. Everything seemed pretty normal until a shocking revelation came over him, and it sent chills down his spine. It was a detail that investigators had overlooked in the murder of the widow's husband as well. There is no phone on the 2nd floor. The detective then suddenly heard a noise, withdrew his weapon, and ran out of the room, only to find an empty wheelchair. This is why you should never rush to conclusions. Once there was a young couple getting married. At their wedding reception, their friends decided to play a game of hide and seek with the bride and the groom. It was decided that the groom would try to find his bride, and the bride would find somewhere to hide. But hours passed and the groom had searched everywhere in the venue and couldn't find where she was hiding. He assumed that she must be having second thoughts about getting married. He got mad and stormed off. Weeks went by and he accepted that she must have gone on with her life and didn't want to contact him anymore, so he did the same. A few years later, though, the cleaning lady found something horrifying. She went into the attic of the building where the reception had taken place years ago. There she found an old trunk. She opened it and found the rotting body of the missing bride. Her face was still frozen in a scream, and inside the trunk were huge scratch marks from when she tried to get out. This is why you should never talk to strangers in an elevator. One day, a surgeon was working the night shift at a hospital. He just finished his operation on a patient and was going to the basement. He entered the elevator and there was one other woman already inside. They were casually chatting when the elevator door opened and another woman was about to enter. But the surgeon looked horrified. He quickly slammed the close button and punched the highest floor of the building. Surprised, the woman asked why he was being so rude and wouldn't let the other woman in the elevator with them. The surgeon explained that in this hospital, all patients wear white wristbands with their names printed on them, but the red wristbands are placed on all of the corpses. The surgeon then looks to the woman in the elevator with him and says, "That was the same woman I just operated on. She died on the operating table. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman in the elevator with him just smiled, raised her arm, and said, "You mean like this one?" This is why you should never talk to strangers. According to Japanese legend, Kuchisake Onna was once a beautiful woman who cheated on her husband. When her husband found out about it, he became full of rage and sliced the corners of her mouth from ear to ear. After she died, she came back as a vengeful spirit who covers her scars with a surgical mask, so she looks entirely normal otherwise. She usually wanders the streets at night with a large pair of scissors or a knife. If you're unlucky enough to be chosen as her victim, she will ask you, "Am I pretty?" If you answer no, she will cut you in half. If you say yes, she will cut your mouth from ear to ear just like her too. But you can survive her by answering her question with something else, like, maybe, I don't know, am I pretty? You can also buy some time by throwing money or hard candies at her, which you will stop to pick up. But others say that if she's chosen you, she will show up to your bedroom and kill you in your sleep. So remember, especially since everyone is wearing a mask nowadays, be careful who you talk to. How far would you go to make a wish come true? For one boy, his wish would cause him to do the unthinkable. At first, this boy had a normal life. He lived with his parents in a small town, and every time he lost a tooth, his parents would tell him about the tooth fairy. They said that he could bury his tooth and make a wish, and that wish would come true. Until one day, a tragedy that would change his life forever happened. His parents were in a car crash, and he was the only one who made it out. By this time, he had no more teeth left to give to the tooth fairy. So this boy went into his father's tool shed, took a hammer, and knocked out all of his teeth one by one. He was sent to a mental hospital after that, but after a few years was released. It seems like everyone in town forgotten about the tragedy of his family until a series of home invasions were reported. Nothing was ever taken in these home invasions except the parents would find their children in their beds, crying with their teeth knocked out. When they found this pattern, the police went to the boy's home and found it abandoned. But in the backyard, they found over 1,000 small teeth buried. It's rumored that this man is still out there somewhere looking for his next victim. This is why you should never knock on a stranger's door. Once there was a man trying to check into a hotel. The woman at the front desk gave him his key and told him none of the guests are allowed to go into the room across the hall. He agreed, but as he continued to stay in the hotel, he grew more and more curious about the room he wasn't supposed to go in. At one point, he even walked down the hall to that room and tried the door. It was locked. Then he bent down and looked through the keyhole. He saw that it was just the same as his hotel room. But in the corner of the room, there was a woman whose skin was extremely pale, almost a sickly white. Her back was to the wall, so the man didn't see what she looked like. He almost knocked on the door, but then just decided to leave her alone. The next day, he walked past the door again and decided to look into the keyhole. This time, there was no hotel room and no woman. It was all just red. He thought that this seemed really strange, so he went to the front desk and asked about the room. After insisting on an answer, the woman at the front desk told him, "A long time ago, a man killed his wife in that room, and her ghost is still there. But these ghosts are not what you might imagine. They're completely white all over, except for their eyes, which are red." This is why I don't tell anyone where I live. There was once a boy who asked his single father for a bedtime story, so the father told him. There was once a boy named Colby who made friends with another boy online called Helper23. On Colby's birthday, Helper23 wanted to give him a present in real life, so Colby gave him his home address, where he lives with his mom, his dad, and his little brother. But then Colby started to feel a bit weird about giving his address to a stranger online. The next night, he thought he had to tell his parents about it. He called out to his dad but got no reply, then found both his parents killed and a man wearing a dark hoodie holding a knife in the hallway. As Colby started to beg for his life, he hears his little brother crying in the next room. The intruder then strangles Colby and leaves the house with Colby's baby brother. The boy then looks up at his father and asks, "Why did the intruder take the baby?" To which his father just calmly smiled and said, "I've always wanted to be a father." Do you know someone who had a crush that went too far? Jason only loved two things, butterflies and Angie. He wanted to ask her out for ages, but never had the courage to. He was always kind of a strange kid, with his obsession with butterflies and all. All his school supplies in his room were all decorated with butterflies. People at school didn't know much about him except that. Some rumors flew around every once in a while though. Some people even said that his mother had gifted him a butterfly resin before she passed away. Angie, however, never made fun of him. In fact, when Jason asked her on Halloween weekend if he could drive her to a costume party together, she thought it was charming, but things took a dark turn quickly. At first, the car ride was awkward, but not anything to be worried about. Then Angie looked at her phone and saw that they passed the address of the party. She said, "Hey, you're going the wrong way," but there was only a grin on Jason's face. The next day, police found both Angie and Jason. Jason was lying on the ground, cold, but above him, Angie was strung up on the ceiling, with two large pieces cut out from her back and opened up to look like wings. This is why you should never answer a call from your own number. Tim was woken up by his phone constantly ringing, but he ignored it and went back to sleep. That day he went to work, pulled out his phone, and saw that he had a missed call from his own number. He thought this must be a coincidence. He went to hang out with his friend and another call came. This time he picked up and heard his own voice repeating whatever he'd say back to him, until he was about to hang up. The voice said, "You're going downhill." He felt very uneasy but tried to let it go. The next morning at work, his number called again, but this time he felt terrified. So he made up an excuse and drove home as fast as he could. He knew deep inside some kind of a confrontation was coming. As soon as he got home, he saw his car pull into the driveway, and he saw himself get out of the car with a terrifying smile on his face. His doppelganger had stalked him and found him. Tim barricaded himself in his bedroom, but his doppelganger was banging on the door. He knew he was almost out of time. That's when he had one last idea. He pulled out his phone and called himself, and he heard his own voice reply, "How are you calling me from this number? Who are you?" This story is the reason why I'll never live alone. Once there was an elderly woman who lived alone in a cabin in the mountains. She lived a quiet life and rarely had visitors. Her husband had passed away recently, so her only companion was her beloved dog. Every night when the woman went to bed, the dog would lick her hand as a way to let her know that he was always there to protect her. But one night the woman was woken up to the sound of her dog whimpering, so she reached her hand below her bed and the dog licked her hand as always. She thought the dog must just be cold, so she didn't think that much of it. In the morning, she stuck her hand out again, but the dog wasn't there anymore. She thought he must be up already and was just wandering around the house, but what she'd find later would terrify her. She heard dripping noises, so she went to the bathroom to see if it was a sink, but it wasn't. Instead, she saw her loving companion hung up by the bathtub, and on the bathroom mirror were the words written in blood, "Humans can lick too." This boy lied about his age just to date me. Story time. So back when my cute self was a senior in high school, there was this new girl that came to our school. Long story short, me and her ended up becoming super close. I went to her house, spent the night, her family loved me. I mean, why wouldn't they? Anyways, she had a brother. We're gonna call him Binky. Me and Binky got pretty close. Now I want you guys to keep in mind, Binky didn't go to my school because their parents were divorced. So the sister who I was friends with lived with her mom, and Binky lived with his dad who lived in another city. But sometimes Binky would go to his mom's house, which is how I met him. Now that we got that out of the way, as me and Binky were getting closer, one day he asked me, "Hey, how old are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I just turned 17. How about you?" He told me, "Oh, I'm 17 too, but my 18th birthday is coming up." After a while, me and him eventually started dating. Then one day, I ran into his cousin who happened to go to my school. The rest of this story is crazy.